Over the last 30 years, there have been thousands of reported sightings of unidentified flying objects over the British Isles.
You think I'm bloody daft, but this is a UFO.
In the summer of 2008, reports of flying saucers and other crafts were capturing the headlines again. Over the years, numerous eyewitnesses, including military personnel, police officers, and experienced airline pilots have testified to seeing strange lights in the sky and other mysterious phenomena.
Lava flock, very bright yellow.
It's the brightest light I've ever seen in my life.
Many of these UFO sightings remain unexplained to this day. But what or who were they? Could they really be evidence of extraterrestrial life?
A strange, small red light. Weird. It's coming this way. It is definitely coming this way.
It was just something out of a science fiction film. It was totally unbelievable.
Tonight we hear firsthand from those who witnessed them and examine the truth behind some of Britain's most celebrated UFO sightings. In April 2007, the airspace above the Channel Island of Alderney played host to one of the more unusual British UFO sightings.
I thought initially it was an aeroplane, but clearly nothing like I'd ever seen before.
I saw a single lozenge-shaped light below us.
I didn't see any outline to the shape because the light was so bright.
I was in the front looking at it through binoculars. Pretty scary.
Yeah, the second one appears to be beyond the first from where I am.
This is probably the best witness that I've interviewed in 30 years.
If it was designed by an engineer, that man, I'd like to shake him by the hand because it was a fantastic piece of equipment.
On April the 23rd, 2007, Captain Ray Bowyer was making a routine passenger flight from the south coast to the Channel Islands. He'd flown the same route for almost 10 years.
We loaded the passengers normally, ordinary day, little wind, nice smooth conditions, very good visibility, you can see very well. Normal day, yeah, into the cruise, 4,000 feet, no problems.
The 80-mile journey to Alderney takes just 45 minutes. 10 miles from France, it's the most northerly of the Channel Islands. Ray Bowyer was expecting it to be a routine flight.
Just a little bit of paperwork, keeping a good lookout for other aircraft, and that's when I saw the first signs of the sighting on that day. It was about 10 miles south of the Isle of Wight. I saw basically what was a brilliant yellow lamp, brilliant yellow light ahead. Sometimes these are reflections from the ground, and in fact I could see even from that distance that Guernsey was immediately behind that light. So I presumed at the very first sight that it was a reflection of the sun on a greenhouse. Looked at it for a moment, then expected it not to be there next time I looked back at it. This didn't go away. It wasn't a couple of moments, it was a minute and then a couple of minutes. And I thought, that's strange. That's very different to anything that I've seen previously. It wasn't a reflection, it was an emission of light. And I thought, well, better have a look at this. And that's when I picked up my binoculars that I always carry. pointed at each end, about 15:1 ratio. Brilliant yellow and a dark band about 2/3 away along from left to right. Don't forget I'm looking at it through between 7 and 10 times magnification to normal eyesight. I could see exactly very quickly and quite plainly that it was nothing like an aeroplane that I'd ever seen before. I actually had to take my glasses off and lift them up just to make sure that it wasn't a reflection from behind or something like that, just to ensure that I was seeing what I was seeing.
By now, the other passengers in the plane were aware that something unusual was going on.
He sort of leant forward, looked over the nose of the aircraft, and when the pilot does that, you take notice.
Kate and John Russell fly regularly between their home in Alderney and the mainland.
I thought, okay, there's something unusual going on here.
Kate then drew my attention to what was going on. Then he got out his binoculars and stared out through the windscreen at that. Never happened before.
I didn't want them to get scared or frightened, you know. Run a professional outfit, you don't want them to be worried about anything really. However, I didn't want to turn back.
Ray Bowyer's immediate thought was to radio air traffic control in Jersey.
Number 544, Jersey.
Hello, 544, Dan, pass message.
The controller guiding the plane into Alderney was Paul Kelly.
On that flight, there's very little to communicate to Ray. It's not normal for someone to suddenly start up a conversation on the RT.
This is the actual air traffic control recording of the flight.
12 o'clock for the next.
Roger, I've got a very bright object, so it wouldn't say how far, extremely bright. Do you have any traffic, can't really say how far, but by 12 o'clock level?
He was reasonably calm, albeit I could detect he was a bit uncertain about something. No known traffic at all in your 12 o'clock.
Whilst air traffic control were trying to locate the sighting, Ray Bowyer was more concerned with avoiding a potential collision. By now he'd been heading towards what he believed was a solid object for almost 4 minutes.
My emotions at that time was simply, what is it? Is it coming towards me or us in the aeroplane? What's it up to?
In April 2007, Captain Ray Bowyer was 4,000 feet above the English Channel, flying towards the island of Alderney, when he spotted a strange light in the sky directly ahead of him.
I thought, well, was it coming towards us? What speed's it doing? Is it going to be in our way in a few moments?
He immediately spoke to air traffic controller Paul Kelly.
Roger, I've got a very bright object. Well, it wouldn't say how far, extremely bright, looking, well, like a cigar.
It's a classic cliche, a cigar-shaped object in the sky. It's what you hear about in reports over the years. Immediately it was very out of the ordinary. He seemed very sure. I was looking for something on my radar that fitted the bill. That may or may not be an object.
It was now 10 minutes since Ray Bowyer had first noticed the object. Neither he nor air traffic control had any idea what it could be.
I think I was more concerned initially about any conflict. Was it an aeroplane?
Even with 20 years of flying experience to his name, Ray Bowyer wasn't sure he could believe what he was seeing. For a second opinion, he turned to the passenger sitting behind him.
I suggested to him, would you like to have a look and see what you can see? And straight away he said, yeah, I can see this. And about that time, he said, there's another one. Sure enough, almost directly beyond that one was a very similar looking object. People further down the fuselage were looking out to see what we were looking at.
I sort of leant forward to look round the people in front and saw an orange lozenge-shaped light
It was at that point, when he had tipped the nose of the plane down, that I noticed two very, very bright lights. I didn't see any outline to the shape because the light was so bright. You know, if you look at a headlight at night, you don't see the edges of the light. You just see the center of the light and then a diffused glow.
Yeah, the second one appears to be beyond the first from where I am. It's exactly the same. It's got a gap. It's a cylindrical object, very bright yellow, and there's a gap in the light about 2/3 the way along it.
I gave the air traffic controller that it was probably the size of a Boeing 737, thinking that it was about 5 or 10 miles away. But it would have appeared that from first sighting it was about 55 miles away. So that must have given it a massive size, really. Very, very large indeed. And with that possibility of it being up to perhaps a mile across, you've got to worry for the safety of an aeroplane which is the size of a postage stamp in comparison. You know.
544, any more information on that aircraft, please?
Despite what Ray Bowyer and his passengers said they were seeing, air traffic controller Paul Kelly could see no evidence of anything in the air.
544, negative, nothing at all in your 12 o'clock for the next 40 miles or so. There was nothing I could determine on the radar that was unusual.
Air traffic initially were very dismissive, but of course my sightings were dead ahead. There's definitely something there.
The objects you were describing were very bright, quite large, and you'd think very obvious, so you would think that other pilots, perhaps in the area, would be able to see the objects.
Although Paul Kelly could see nothing on his radar, Ray Bowyer was still convinced that what he was seeing was a solid object.
Traffic into Alderney reported seeing some unidentified. Jersey 912 Golf, anything down that traffic is about 18 miles ahead of you. Very bright yellow emitting light.
Jersey Blended 832.
Kelly radioed the other aircraft under his control, asking if anyone could see the unidentified object.
We've got something about 8 o'clock resembling the description. Around about the similar range to Alderney from us now.
The moment when another pilot said he could see something in the vicinity of Alderney, it really it did make it much more interesting.
A call came in from a pilot corroborating the sighting. The objects had now been in sight for nearly 12 minutes. Ray Bowyer was concerned about getting his passengers onto the ground safely.
A-line 544, Roger, would you like to send?
Please, I better go down, I think.
It was getting to that point where I was pleased to descend and get on the ground.
Despite the mysterious encounter, flight GR554 landed on time and on schedule at Alderney Airport.
When we landed, Ray turned around and said that he had seen something extraordinary, something he hadn't seen in his 20 years or so of flying, and he was quite obviously disturbed by the experience.
The girl there who works as a crewing, Lucia, she said, you look like you've seen a ghost, you look pale. I said, well, I'm not sure if it's a ghost or not, but it was certainly something odd.
At Jersey Air Traffic Control, Paul Kelly followed the standard procedures for reporting the incident.
I'd taken down notes as I was going along and a sketch drawing, as Ray had described it. And I asked him to fax me his sheet from his flight. In the back of the Manual of Air Traffic Services, there's a section tucked away on reporting unidentified flying objects. It's all quite strange. You phone up the phone number, which is the MOD, and you get an answer machine.
Paul Kelly faxed his report to the MOD and awaited developments. In the days following the incident, word spread quickly through the Channel Islands. Local Guernsey journalist Joel de Wolfson first heard the story from a contact in Alderney. He followed his lead and got in touch with Ray Bowyer.
I got the feeling that Ray was worried initially about it being, you know, Alrini pilots as little green aliens are coming to visit Guernsey and damage his reputation because of it.
But the headlines took both Ray Bowyer and the sighting seriously.
Ray's a very honest, straight down the line kind of guy. The MOD were investigating it, so it added weight to the story straight away.
The story was soon taken up by the national media.
If you had to take an instinctive guess, would you say that it was something of this planet or something from outer space?
I have been asked a question by the press, and my simple answer was, I don't think it's from around here.
Extraordinary.
Well, this object looked like a CD disc on edge, if you like, but very sharp and extremely well defined.
Well, thank you very much for coming in and describing it to us. That's fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you. Well.
The circumstances surrounding the case caught the attention of UFO investigator Dr. David Clarke. In the last 20 years, he's studied over 500 UFO cases from the British Isles.
It stood out from the usual reports that are received on a weekly basis of people seeing lights in the sky. It's not very often that UFOs make the news, but in this particular case, the news media realised that there was something unusual about this.
David Clarke was keen to investigate the incident.
There was hundreds of invites to say, can we investigate your case, and we'd like to have a look at this, can we? And I waited and waited until the right team came along, really, and I didn't really want a team of believers, because they are only trying to prove the point. I wanted a team of skeptics.
He's a good witness. He's probably the best witness that I've interviewed in 30 years. There's very little speculation. He's never added further details to his description. He's been very, very consistent in what he's described.
Putting UFOs aside, David Clarke and his team considered a number of other possible explanations for the sighting.
The UFO phenomena includes lots and lots of different unconnected things, natural phenomena, inexplicable phenomena. There's no definitive connection between any of them other than the fact that they're all things that are seen in the sky. So there is no one UFO phenomenon. There are lots of UFO phenomena.
One of the more straightforward explanations for supposed UFO sightings is the weather and the effect of unusual atmospheric conditions. One of the leading experts in the field is Dr. Grant Allen of Manchester University.
The atmosphere can play all sorts of tricks with light, especially light from the sun. Anybody that's ever come into land over an airport might have noticed below them rainbows, dances of light on the tops of the clouds, shadows. I think because they were described as sunlight yellow, that gives the game away that it's some sort of reflection of sunlight.
Dr. Allen created a computer model of the prevailing weather conditions over the Channel Islands at the time of the incident. His model indicated an unusual meteorological anomaly, a temperature inversion, where bands of hot and cold air switch places to create an effect which causes the sun to appear as a narrow band of light.
Even for Captain Bowyer, who might have had years of experience and many flight hours, the range of atmospheric conditions could be such that he just wouldn't have recognised this optical phenomena in this case.
I'm sure some of the sightings are likely meteorological phenomena, but I was actually seeing something which was tangible and physical, and not a reflected light, not some sort of atmospheric effect.
If what Ray Bowyer saw over the English Channel wasn't a natural phenomenon, then what was it?
544, any more information on that aircraft, please?
544, negative. It's just the primary contact that we sometimes get.
Pilot Troy Queripel knows the skies over the Channel Islands well. With 15 years' experience of flying in the region, he has his own theory as to the cause of the mysterious lights. After overhearing the conversations with air traffic control, he met Ray Bowyer when he returned to Southampton.
Ray convinced me that what he'd seen was real. It was hardware. It wasn't weather phenomenon. He'd never seen anything like it before. My theory was that it could be military activity. About 15 miles to the west of Guernsey, there's military controlled danger zones.
These zones are restricted airspace and can only be entered with the express permission of the Ministry of Defence. Nick Pope worked on the MOD's UFO desk for 3 years.
The UK air defence region, which goes out in some cases for hundreds of miles into the seas surrounding Britain, contains a number of areas where military exercises take place. You'll also, in some of these areas, see more exotic things going on in terms of the testing of prototype aircraft and unmanned aerial vehicles. There are things flying around, maybe not operational, but certainly in prototype stage, that you won't see for 10 or even 15 years. A very good example is the stealth fighter. This was publicly declared in 1988 during the Panama campaign to oust General Noriega. Now, it's a matter of record now that, of course, the stealth fighter had been operational and before that had been flying in prototype sense for many, many years, probably even back in the 70s.
Could a military test aircraft have been responsible for Ray Bowyer's sighting? As part of his investigation, David Clarke followed up all the leads that might explain the Alderney sighting. He contacted the Ministry of Defence and obtained a copy of their report on the case.
In this particular case, we were able to eliminate military activity pretty early on. The Ministry of Defence said on the record that there were no military exercises taking place.
For Ray Bowyer, it confirmed his own theory as to what he'd seen.
I believe it was nothing like any aeroplane. I've seen some strange sort of development type aircraft over the years. The Flying Wing, the Vulcan type aeroplane, various German experimental aircraft, but nothing like this, nothing that emitted a brilliant yellow light, and it wasn't a reflection, it was an emission of light.
As it transpired, the sighting over Alderney was not an isolated incident. Builder Paul Godian claimed to have witnessed a similar phenomenon on the island 7 weeks earlier.
I thought, wow, this is, within a fairly short space of time, somebody else has actually seen something up there. It just seemed all too real. Very real.
Paul Godian was alone on the northern tip of the island just before dawn.
I like the walk in the morning. It's a nice part of the island, and I do that every day. I saw two lights start to appear under the cloud base, just directly ahead of me. I presumed they were coming towards me. They were sort of bobbing in and out of the cloud base at what I'd presume to be about 300 or 400 feet. This seems strange, as the only aircraft at about 6:30 in the morning would be the paper plane going over to Guernsey, and at that height in misty weather it just didn't seem as if it would be feasible for it to do so.
But the set of lights did something completely unexpected.
The one on the left darted at a really high speed towards the left, the west. I panned around to follow the line of sight, and all of a sudden, between myself and the two forts, appeared 20, 25 maybe, lights of the same size, bright white lights, in a sort of broken arrowhead shape, broken dart shape. They were moving horizontally along the sky line below the cloud base, south towards Guernsey. And there was no noise, absolutely no noise from any of it at all. I didn't know what to think. I really didn't know what to think. I just thought, that is really strange.
After two seemingly inexplicable sightings in less than 2 months, was there something about the island of Alderney itself that could provide the answer? On April the 23rd, 2007, two bright lights were reported in the sky above the Channel Island of Alderney. They were witnessed by airline pilot Ray Bowyer and his passengers.
I thought, what is it? Is it coming towards me or us in the aeroplane? What's it up to?
Just 7 weeks earlier, Paul Gaudian also claimed to have seen strange lights floating above the island.
It just seemed all too real. Very real.
If these sightings did have a rational explanation, one theory was that they were Earth lights. A natural phenomena caused by movement of the Earth's tectonic plates, Earth lights are often seen in the sky before an earthquake. Geologist Professor Peter Salmond has studied them in detail.
Earth lights can have many forms, and certainly seeing a pair of lights looking like a low-flying aircraft would easily have been Earth lights. They hover close to the ground and bathe the air in this sort of mysterious sort of glow.
The island of Alderney does lie on a geological fault line known as the Alderney-Ushant Fault. Could this have been the cause of the mysterious lights in the sky? 4 days after Ray Bowyer's sighting, seemingly compelling evidence for this theory presented itself. The Kent coastline suffered the largest earthquake in the region for 50 years. During the build-up to the earthquake, the tremors would have been large enough to reach the Alderney fault lines, with a force sufficient to create the lights in the sky. But one thing makes the theory unlikely to explain the events of April the 23rd.
We wouldn't expect to see Earth lights with a large body of water present. Our understanding is you need to have a discharge from the Earth through an earthquake fault into the atmosphere.
Whatever the explanation, Ray Bowyer isn't the only airline pilot to have witnessed strange lights in the sky. Since World War II, there have been thousands of sightings of unidentified flying objects recorded by pilots.
Some of the crew and passengers of a BOAC Stratocruiser reported seeing mysterious objects in the sky over the Atlantic.
In 1954, Captain James Howard, on a flight from New York to London, claimed to have seen something resembling a flying saucer.
Well, very conveniently, Captain, we've got a nice blackboard here. This object was continually changing. Sometimes one end would appear to disappear, sometimes this was very much larger, sometimes it was almost a V-shaped affair like this. And I think there's no question that it was no illusion and that it was being intelligently handled.
UFO historian Tim Good has compiled hundreds of declassified eyewitness accounts from pilots.
In the United Kingdom, sightings tended to increase from about 1950 onwards, I would say, and there were many reports from pilots beginning around that period. I would say it peaked in 1952, and Winston Churchill, Prime Minister of Britain at the time, demanded of his air staff what the hell was going on. He said, what's all this stuff about flying saucers amount to? What's the truth? And in a few weeks they came back to him and said, Prime Minister, don't worry, it's all been dealt with. We've been in touch with our American counterparts in intelligence, and all the unexplained sightings have been explained, and there's nothing to it at all.
The response of Churchill's air staff was designed to end investigations into UFOs. But despite official denial that such objects existed, sightings by pilots continued. In October 1954, Flight Lieutenant James Salandin was flying a Gloucester Meteor out of RAF North Weald in Essex.
I was flying at about 16,000 feet at the time, and suddenly I saw three what I thought were aeroplanes come down. And when they were, must have been about 800 or 900 yards away, the first two peeled off to the left. A gold spherical object and a silver one, with buns on top and bun below, No flames, no portholes, no nothing. I have never seen any aircraft produced by anybody in the world that looked anything like these things.
Whatever Salandin saw, the objects then moved closer.
And then the third one was coming straight towards me. I suppose he'd probably be about 300 to 400 yards away, so it's quite a clear picture. Couldn't have been anything else. And when he got to that distance, he went off to the same to follow his two buddies. I tried to follow after the third one, but it was impossible. The thing was so quick. The closing speed between us was about 900 to 1,000 miles an hour. I shall remember it to my dying day. What they were, I don't know. Where they came from, I don't know. But I definitely saw them. I was an experienced pilot at the time.
Experienced pilots have been seeing objects in the sky for over 50 years. But could the explanation for their sightings be more psychological than physical? Professor Richard Wiseman has studied the phenomenon.
If you are up there in the sky and you're travelling very, very fast and you see something in the distance, well, you have to make a snap decision about it. You've got to size its size, the direction it's travelling, exactly what it is, and so on. And that has to be done in the blink of an eye. If they do see something anomalous, they've got no kind of category to put that into. They're trying to work out what it is they're actually perceiving there. I think they're sincere in their testimony. I think they're trying to tell us best they can what they think they saw. The question is one of accuracy, not of honesty.
But what of Ray Bowyer's experience above Alderney in April 2007? The lights he saw in front of his plane for a period of some 12 minutes were also witnessed by several of his passengers.
He probably saw it for something like a quarter of an hour. We probably saw it for a matter of minutes. The size of it, almost impossible to say. It wasn't a clearly defined edge to it. So you have no real idea as to where the centre core is and how much you're actually seeing.
When UFO investigator David Clark examined air traffic control recordings of the flight, he found a reference to an object which could be seen clearly on the radar.
Yeah, there is something possibly your left at 10 o'clock at a range of 3 miles this time.
I've got a definite contact by 12 o'clock.
Could this object have been what was seen from the cockpit of the plane?
You can hear the inflections in Ray's voice when he's speaking to the controller that he's seeing something really, really unusual. You know, there's no hoax here.
I think they're possibly over, maybe to the west of Alderney.
Roger. I do have a primary contact, just one blob, if you like, 8 miles or so to the west of Alderney.
We were initially intrigued about this suggestion that something had been seen on radar, because in the initial conversation between Paul Kelly, the air traffic controller, and Ray, he does mention at one point that he could see something on radar, but he thought it was an anaprop.
Anaprop is something normally ignored by air traffic controllers. It's caused by radar signals bouncing off solid objects such as flocks of birds or even large waves. David Clark was convinced that there might be something in the fleeting anaprop image, if only it could be seen clearly. The radar information he had to examine was filled with the traces of the 600 flights a day that travel in and out of the Channel Islands.
If you look at the raw radar data, what you see is a screen that's absolutely filled with moving dots and colours and shapes. And, you know, you really have to know what you're looking at in order to be able to determine whether there is something on there of significance.
Jersey Air Traffic Control Engineering Department began the job of examining the radar recordings to see if they could find any clues to what lay underneath.
For once, it seemed here was the opportunity that we may be able to get something definitively solid in terms of a radar trace of something that had been reported visually. And that really, science would have to sit up and take notice if we had some kind of evidence of that kind.
David Clark now had concrete radar evidence with which to analyse whether the Alderney incident was really as mysterious as it appeared. But not all sightings of UFOs are as well documented. Some cases are still shrouded in official secrecy. On April the 21st, 1971, Wing Commander Alan Turner was supervising air traffic controller at RAF Sockley in Hampshire. He's never spoken publicly about his experience before.
I was sitting at desk, just twiddling the thumbs. All of a sudden the coordinator said, "What is that?" To the east of Salisbury Plain were, at that point, 2 radar returns. They're called blips. They were travelling in a southeasterly direction, and a third appeared, a fourth appeared, a fifth, a sixth appeared, all from the same spot. Very, very unusual indeed. What is this? It doesn't obey any of the known rules.
Turner examined the blips on his screen and concluded that the only thing that could have been moving at that speed was the most advanced fighter of the day, the Lightning. But the sheer number of aircraft indicated was simply unbelievable.
It was so unusual, people just looked at it and said, "What is going on?" We're talking 30, 35 aircraft. No air defence commander in his right mind would get the entire Lightning force at one location. He'd have absolutely nothing left with which to defend the United Kingdom air defence region. You could cut the air with a knife. It became electric rapidly. People were more than surprised.
Alan Turner decided to dispatch an RAF bomber to investigate.
I kept asking the pilot, "Are you visual?" And then he said, the voice sounded quite jittery, "I don't know what that was." It was a quarter of a mile away, climbing like the clappers, and we saw it on radar. We did not see it visually.
And the radar within the plane was not the only one that picked up this event.
There were 7 technically different radars, all seeing exactly the same thing. 2 radars at Southern Radar, 2 radars at Heathrow, 2 at the fighter control establishment, and the airborne one with the Canberra bomber.
Alan Turner gathered together all the physical evidence that was being recorded during the incident.
There are 2 types of tape. One is the video tape taken from the radar, and the other is the voice tape. And that is air to ground, ground to air. That is all landlines and all the conversations between the controllers and each other. I have absolutely no idea where it is, or even if it still exists. All I do know is that it did exist. I am absolutely certain that there was some very strange phenomenon on radar which no one has yet come up with any rational explanation for.
Over 30 years later, the evidence of Alan Turner's encounter has still to be released into the public domain.
I think the policy behind this was they were baffled. They didn't know what these UFOs were, and they didn't want that fact emerging in public that they couldn't explain what was going on.
Whilst evidence of military UFO encounters is rarely available for public scrutiny, Ray Bowyer's sighting over Alderney was different. Engineers at Jersey Air Traffic Control had access to their original radar records. They isolated the 12-minute period in which Ray Bowyer claimed to have seen objects in the sky in front of him, then stripped away the tracks produced by identifiable aircraft. 2 distinct traces emerged from the data. What they revealed were the tracks of 2 unidentified objects, one heading north and one south.
It looks to me like very likely that the positions of the objects that I saw were in the right place for the radar returns that I've received.
Were these traces really proof that 2 UFOs had been witnessed flying in the skies over Alderney?
Yeah, the second one appears to be beyond the first from where I am.
In April 2007, pilot Ray Bowyer witnessed 2 unidentified objects over the Channel Islands.
It was a definite shape, pointed at each end, about 15-to-1 ratio, brilliant yellow and a dark band about 2/3 away, along from left to right.
I think they're possibly over, maybe to the west of Alderney.
Roger. I do have a...
UFO investigator David Clark studied the available documentary evidence,
8 miles or so to the west of...
paying particular attention to the data provided by air traffic control.
Possibly be the second one furthest out that I can see.
You really have to know what you're looking at in order to be able to determine whether there is something on there of significance. And a lot of the returns on that screen can be eliminated.
When engineers stripped away identifiable air traffic, radar revealed 2 slow-moving objects which seemed to fit the paths of the mysterious lights seen by Ray Bowyer.
Now, Ray, when he saw those returns, initially made a connection that possibly that was the UFO he'd seen.
They would appear to be in exactly the right position at the right time. They both appeared for about 55 minutes at one point, travelled in different directions away from each other, and then both appeared to disappear after 55 minutes.
But David Clark was not convinced. He felt the traces could have been caused by radar bouncing off objects on the sea below, so he studied the schedules for the passenger ferries that moved between the islands.
We know from reconstructing the route taken by the ferry that it would have been in that general area at precisely that time, or certainly around that time. So I think it's far more likely that one of those prominent tracks is a ferry.
With a seemingly rational explanation for at least one of the radar images, this line of inquiry was closed. There was now no physical evidence to back up the sightings of Ray Bowyer and his passengers in April 2007. The final report by Dr. David Clark and his investigation team could reach no definitive conclusion as to the real explanation for what appeared in the sky over Alderney.
I think it's much more accurate to describe what he saw as a UAP, an unidentified aerial phenomena, some kind of natural phenomena that's yet to be identified and categorized by scientists.
Whatever caused the lights over Alderney, Ray Bowyer and his passengers still stand by what they saw on April the 23rd, 2007.
I was a bit disappointed that they hadn't found a solution, because it now hangs in the air with all the other hundreds of cases.
It isn't until later on you realise that somebody like Ray is regarding it as something quite out of the ordinary that you begin to wish that you paid more attention.
I hope we live long enough to know the explanation. I have to confess now, every time we get in a plane, I keep wondering, are we going to see the lights?
As for Captain Ray Bowyer, he wasn't the first pilot to spot something unexplained in British airspace, and it's unlikely he'll be the last.
I kept asking the pilot, "Are you visual?" He sounded shaken. There was clearly something which he did not understand and couldn't explain.